This week's tip, and the tips that are going to be coming for the next few weeks, are about how to fix mistakes. And the reason that I'm doing this is I taught Binka Schwann's Knitting 911 at our recent conference because her husband was ill and she couldn't come, and I was forced to learn all of this stuff. Now, I've got 3 mistakes in this tiny swatch, and I have a photograph that shows these better on a larger swatch knit with larger needles. This is a twisted stitch, and if you stretch the stitches, you can see that these stitches are all open at the bottom, and this one is twisted at the base. And twisted stitches, not great. They have a different gauge than other stitches. Now over here we have this little loopy thing, and that is a split stitch. And notice that this guy, the strands are not as strong. This is a weak spot in the work. And then over here, this one is kind of hard to see. Notice that I have this elongated stitch. And how that happened is that that stitch was inadvertently slipped when I was working that row. And it's kind of hard to spot on the right side. And in fact, if you don't notice it, let it go. But on the wrong side, it is noticeable. And you can tell because I've got this little guy right there. Now to fix these stitches, I need to work back to where they are. And I'm going to work back to this column, and I'm going to unknit. And I'm going to go in from the back so that the right leg of the stitch, Petty Paw, be quiet, my cat wants me to get her a treat. And I'm going to do a video in a couple of weeks on stitch orientation. Slip, and I'm almost there. So here's the column of stitches where that split stitch is. And I'm going to let those stitches ladder down. Until I get to the spot. And I can see why this happened. I knit into only part of the plies. Now to fix it, I'm just going to insert my needle or crochet hook and bring up those loops with a stitch on the front and the ladder on the back, then pull them in. And oh my god, it's a tragedy. My stitches have fallen off the needle. What can I do? What can I do? And again, we're going to talk more about this later, but I'm just going to insert my needle back in there. Okay, I've got those stitches, and this, I'm actually going to ladder over to those other mistakes. Okay, here's my other mistake where I have that twisted stitch. I'm going to unknit to where that twisted stitch is, and it is right there. And I'm going to do the same thing. Now when I fixed that earlier one, I made sure that the stitch contained all of the plies. And with this one, I'm going to make sure that it's not twisted when I put it back on the needle. And notice how the right leg of the stitch is leaning towards the right. I want to make sure that it is open. Now if I were to go through this way where it's twisted with the right leg towards the left, that would just, and then pick up stitches, it would be twisted. But I want to make sure that the right leg is to the right, the left leg is to the left, and that it is open at the base. Okay, and I'm going to pick up the stitches with my loop on the top, and I'm getting them. And I'm going to put this stitch. Now if I were to put the stitch on this way, it would be twisted on the needle. I want to make sure that the right leg is at the front. Now that leaves me just to this last one. Oops. And it's always better to knit into that stitch so that you don't drop it. And here's where that stitch is. I'm going to let it go. And the problem with this is, notice how large this stitch is and how small this horizontal bar is. When I fixed those other stitches, I had quite a wide horizontal bar. I don't in this case because I didn't have a stitch that used up the right amount of yarn. And so I pull that guy in there, it's kind of tight and hard. And what I'm going to have is a real tight stitch right there. And when you're doing these kind of fixes, the thing you have to keep in mind is that sometimes when it's fixed, it's not going to look that great because it's impacted the stitches around. And in cases like that, you just kind of have to eyeball it and see, would it be better to undo it or to let it be fixed? And that's a decision you need to make. Now, on these other stitches, you really don't notice it, but that one stitch there, I'd have to work a few more rows. It's pulled the yarn from this stitch, it's pulled the yarn, and those stitches are going to be smaller. So next week, we'll do another type of fix.